Hi Sabine. I think I've solved the problem with the video now. Hopefully it's not going to lock up and I'll be able to show you this one. These are the three images that I've got of yours. So for this particular image we're going to be looking at the sharpening. Okay, now the sharpening and noise reduction in the develop module is exactly the same as it is in Adobe Camera Raw, you know, through Bridge. It's the same algorithms, it's just basically a different interface. So, oh, come on, hurry up. Here we go. So now we've come through. Now, I don't think I've made any differences to this. Let me see. On the detail. Okay, these are my settings. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get your settings. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to download your setting again. And to do that, all I need is the XMP file to be downloaded. So I'm going to download that. Direct download. Right, so it's in the showing the folder. So here's the folder over here. So I'm going to cut it. Then in your is that one there. So paste. Now there's already one there, but that's got my changes on, so I'm going to replace the file in the destination. Now I'm going to fire up Lightroom again, and if you see here, this now says metadata for this photo has been changed by another application. Should Lightroom import the new settings from the XMP file or overwrite the disk settings, the XMP file, with those from the catalog? Well, we want to import them. We want to have the settings you used. Okay. So up there it said read in XMP data. So now when we have a look, you've got sharpening right up, your detail, your masking, but all of this is, yeah, it's a bit much. Anyway, let's see. I seem to recall on one of these that you had a sharpening or radius of 3. Now, I'm having a look at the child's eyes at 2:1. Now, I always judge sharpening and noise reduction at 2:1. Now on your camera, ISO 200, I know that this image will be incredibly clean, but you've got a lot of noise here. All of this is noise from over sharpening. Okay? Do you see here in these smooth tones, there's all this crunchiness, and that crunchiness is just where the surface has been sharpened, but there's nothing to sharpen, so it ends up with a load of noise. Sharpening really should be applied to edges only, and these are edges. Okay, but these are just surfaces. So first thing I do is I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I think it's the optional command key on a Mac, but it's an Alt key on a Windows PC. So I'm going to talk you through the sharpening and noise reduction panel. First of all, I hold down the Alt key. Actually, before that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a snapshot. So this will be Sabine sharpening. So now I've got a snapshot of your settings. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, hold the slider And what the Alt key does, it turns it black and white, and it shows up all of the crunchiness of the sharpening, everything in there. So I'm going to drag this back to somewhere around about 50. And this is a judgment thing, but this judgment has come from just years of doing this and doing it for printing. Now the radius, I vaguely remember you had a radius of 3 on one of the images. So what that's doing is, if you have a look at, say, the outline of the nose, that radius setting is how far from any particular pixel, how far in pixels the sharpening is applied. So that's a radius of 3. So you've got sharpening for every pixel, a total width of 6 pixels, which really gives you these halos. Have a look at this area down here and you'll see a halo. Okay, do you see that white outline? That's a halo. We really want to try and avoid that. So I generally bring a radius down to around 0.8 or 0.9. So that's the radius, is the width of the sharpening. Okay, how wide the sharpening is applied. Now the detail in the middle at a value of 50, there's, how can I explain this? You've got two sharpening algorithms. Okay, so there's two of these sharpening algorithms. As you move to the left, one is applied. When you move to the right, another sharpening algorithm is applied. When it comes to the middle, it's perfectly balanced between the two. So there's two sharpening algorithms being applied, and as you move to one side or the other, it gradually increases the amount of one over the other. So if I recall correctly, the detail on the left-hand slide, on the left-hand side of the slider, is a halo suppression algorithm for the sharpening. As you can see, there's not much in the way of halo now. But as we come over to the right-hand side, it's another algorithm, which, if I recall correctly, is a deconvolution algorithm, and you don't need to concern yourself with what they are, but just have a look at the difference between them. Okay, so it's which sharpening algorithm do you prefer? And with images involving people, I generally go to the left a touch. I don't go too far to the left, because that's my personal preference. But there are some images where you're doing landscape work or stuff like that where you might want to come over here. So I'm going to bring it back over here now, slightly to the left. Now the masking one, this is the one that's really important. Masking, when you hold the Alt key down, the screen goes white. Everything that's white on the screen is being sharpened. Now, as I've said, you don't want sharpening to occur on surfaces. You only want sharpening on edges. So by moving the slider slightly to the right, what it does, it shows where the sharpening is being applied. Now, for instance, in this area, it's still crunchy. We don't want sharpening to be applied there. So I'm going to bring this up until you see that goes almost black. And now, as you can see, you've only got sharpening on the edges. Okay, so somewhere around about there for me is fine. But now you've still got noise in here as a result of the sharpening. Okay. Now, to get rid of the noise or the luminance component, I hold the Alt key down. Don't forget, Alt key works on every one of these sliders. By holding it down and moving it very slowly to the left, it has an effect. Do you see now, by going all the way up, it's completely wiped out any noise. Now, what sharpening puts in, luminance and noise reduction takes away. So one sharpens, one blurs. And in effect, the noise reduction, you bring it in this area, you bring it in until the noise you see disappears. Now to my eye, that's a reasonable amount there. There's just a touch of noise left, but I'm happy with that. Now the detail and contrast sliders, these won't have any effect on an image with an ISO like that. These are really coming to their own when you've got extremely high ISO images, 6,000, 12,000, 25,000, etc. And that's when you see an effect there. So on an ISO 200 image, these just won't come into work. And it's the same with the color noise reduction or the chroma. The detail and smoothness just won't have an effect when you've got an ISO 200. Now, by holding down the Alt key, I'm going to take this out, and if you look in this area very, very carefully, I'm not sure whether it'll show, Sabine, you'll see there's red and greeny and blue blotchiness, and that's color noise. Color noise is really quite objectionable. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move the color noise slider, holding down the Alt key, just enough until you see that blotchiness disappear. For my eye, that blotchiness has disappeared now. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to bother here. And that doesn't look too bad to my eye. I might drag it down a touch further. Okay, so at that point I'm quite happy with those settings. So I'm now just going to call this John's Sharpening. So now when we have a look at the eye, that's your settings. Do you see the crunchiness in the eye? That's my Oscar, he's talking to you. Here's my settings. So that goes blurry, but there's also less noise. So let's have a look at this eye. This is a 200%. So here's your sharpening. It's very, very crunchy. And that sort of thing is really indicative of over sharpening. So we just bring it back a touch, and it goes a little bit blurry, but don't forget we're looking at 200%. So we zoom out a touch. Let's have a look this time. So I can still see the crunchiness in there, whereas on my sharpening that crunchiness has disappeared. Sharpening is really very important for printing and for screen work. So all of my sharpening is done, every image that goes to the printer or goes to the web is sharpened. It's just a necessary step for me. It's one of those things. Now there are people who say sharpening isn't required, my camera's already sharp enough, but quite frankly they're idiots. Because of the way cameras work, you've got a blur filter in front of the sensor, and that is designed to stop certain problems occurring. Now that blur filter or a moire filter needs to be compensated for because it blurs the image before it hits the sensor, and this is why we do sharpening. So there's three types of sharpening. I have what this is capture sharpening. So this is the raw image. Then once you go into Photoshop, you have your Photoshop sharpening, your creative sharpening. This is sharpening for effects that you like, blurring things that you don't want to be super sharp, and sharpening things that you do want to pay attention to. And then the third type of sharpening is when it comes over onto the print module. Now this is again in Photoshop as well, but when you print or whether you do anything like that, you need output sharpening or print sharpening. So there's three types of sharpening. I always apply at least two of them. I'll have input sharpening or capture sharpening, which I've just demonstrated to you, And when I save to either JPEG or my final print or to the printer, I will have print sharpening or output sharpening. As a result of that, I get quite good images. So hopefully this this little tutorial will help you a bit with that. I'm going to finish now. Let me know what you think. Okay? At this stage it hasn't screwed up. Catch you, Sabine.